guys, we are going to keep reading Orbiting Jupiter. Here I am in the living room and it's sunny and beautiful. And I think it's going to snow a lot tomorrow, so I'm just taking advantage of the sun. We are on chapter 7 of Orbiting Jupiter. And when we left off in chapter 6, Joseph was gone. He was disappeared. And Jack was pretty sure he had gone to try to find Jupiter. So, chapter 7. We weren't more than 10 minutes out of Eastham before it began to snow, and not just a little bit of snow. The snow came down with hard gusts, softening the sides of the pickup and blotting out the windshield. The sound of the wind was awful, like it was crying and lost and scared and not sure what to do except to wail. Which is sort of what I thought Joseph would be like right now, out in the middle of it, except he would never in a million years wail. We looked out at the sides of the roads, hoping we'd see Joseph trying to hitch. Now it was so dark and the snow was so hard and the roads already getting bad, I don't think either of us had much hope. He's probably found a place to stay, said my father. I'm not sure he believed it. But what else could we believe? Unless we believed Jay Perkins was out on his snowmobile with Brian Boss and Nick Porter and they'd found Joseph. But neither of us said that. The snow got thicker and thicker, and 45 minutes outside of Eastham, we turned around. We hadn't gotten very far, but we weren't going to get much further than this. Okay, so I was crying on the way back. My father was rubbing my shoulder, and maybe he was crying too. At home, my mother fussed with a late supper, pancakes, since they were easy to keep warm. She had already called Mrs. Stroud. Mrs. Stroud had already called the police, who I guess had already called Eastham Middle, as if Joseph might be hiding out in the janitor's closet or something. So, of course, Mr. Canton had already come by, so full of himself, my mother said, all about how he knew something like this would happen, and kids who come from Stone Mountain are bound to run off, and it's not our fault, it's just who Joseph Brooke is. I thought, my mother said, I was going to take this skillet to his face. She was holding the skillet high over her shoulder, holding it with both hands, and she said this. My mother, I should tell you, is a pacifist. She got arrested 3 times during college for protesting the foreign policy in El Salvador. She got arrested 5 times for protesting against nuclear power. So she doesn't like pushy policemen very much, or pushy vice principals, and probably Mr. Canton was in more danger of a flattened face than he understood. We waited for a phone call and listened to the storm, and waited for a phone call and listened to the storm. Mugs of hot coffee and hot chocolate. My parents talking about what they should have done, how they should have known, wondering where Joseph had found shelter, wondering if someone had picked him up, if he was okay, if he was lost. My parents never asked about my homework. I couldn't have done it anyway. Later than usual, I went upstairs. The room was as cold as it had ever been. The wood floor was freezing, but after a while in the dark, I wrapped my arms around myself and stood by the desk and looked out the window for Jupiter. In the storm, I couldn't see a thing. Joseph wouldn't be able to either. I wondered if Joseph knew what he wanted. He couldn't have. Madeline, Jupiter. I wonder if he knew it couldn't be. So maybe he didn't want to know it couldn't be. So he was out somewhere in the snow heading to Brunswick when it was already too late, which he probably already knew, but he was going to Brunswick anyway. Things go through your mind when you're standing in the cold and the dark watching the snow with your feet freezing on the wooden floor. They do. Next day, Mrs. Stroud called after morning milking. No sign yet. The police had been alerted between Eastham and Brunswick. State troopers were watching on the highways and even the main back roads. They all had the picture of Joseph from when he first went to Stone Mountain, even though it didn't look much like him anymore because my mother would never let him keep his hair that long. Mrs. Stroud said everyone was confident he'd be found soon. My mother said, it's still snowing. He wouldn't be out on the roads. My father said, maybe he'll find someone to help. I said, it's Joseph. He'll know they're looking for him. He's not going to ask someone for help. They were all quiet a while. We heard the school bus clanking and huffing to a stop on the road. I didn't move. No one said anything. The bus clanked and huffed away, and we waited. No phone call all morning, or in the afternoon, or at night when the snow finally stopped and Jupiter came out, bright, bright, bright. The next morning, Mrs. Stroud called again. No sign yet. The police were taking care of things. They would find him soon. That's what she told us yesterday, said my mother, still holding the phone. Tell her we're wondering if we should go down to Brunswick ourselves, said my father. I think we should go down to Brunswick ourselves, my mother said into the phone. Mrs. Stroud did not think we should go to Brunswick. She was concerned that we were getting too involved and had lost a little bit of perspective about Joseph Brooke. After all, after he was found, maybe we should reevaluate. Thank you, Mrs. Stroud, my mother said. She hung up the phone. She looked at the two of us. We're going down to Brunswick. My father looked at her. I already had my coat on. By the way, guys, today we are reading from page 139, excuse me, to 164. Baby Joseph had found a ride all the way down to Brunswick, but he couldn't be sure. We couldn't be sure, so my father stopped every place that looked like Joseph might have tried to stay overnight: gas stations, fast food restaurants, real food restaurants, motels, churches, even bars. The only picture we had of Joseph was of him sitting next to Rosie, and it was better. It was a better picture of Rosie than of Joseph, but it was all we had, and my mother showed it whenever we stopped. Outside Lewiston, we found our first bit of hope in a little Baptist church set back from the road in a tall bunch of pines. Pastor Greenleaf opened the door to our knocking. He stood with one hand on his mop. He'd been cleaning the lobby tiles for Sunday, and looked at the picture. He said, "Yep," and handed the picture back. "Yep," I said. "Yep," as in, "Yep, he was here." "When?" said my mother. "Can't say exactly when he got here, but I found him yesterday morning on the couch in the teen Sunday school room." "Is he still here?" I said. Pastor Greenleaf shook his head. We had breakfast, we talked. He was pretty hungry, since I think all he'd eaten was the potato chips he found in the church kitchen. They'd been there a lot longer than they should have been. I asked him where he was from. He said Portland. Asked him to give me his parents' phone number. I ended up calling the phone of some real estate agent in Yarmouth. When I came back, he was gone. "You called the police?" said my father. "I did," he said. "Really?" "They told us they hadn't heard a thing," said my mother. "Well, they heard me," said Pastor Greenleaf. "What's this boy's name?" "Joseph Brooke," I said. "And your name?" "Jack." "I'll be praying for Joseph Brooke, and for you too, Jack Brooke." Jackson Hurd," said my mother. Pastor Greenleaf looked at me. "That boy isn't your brother?" he said. "I have his back," I said. We drove through Lewiston down towards Brunswick, and stopped again and again, but no one else had seen anything of Joseph. We ate hamburgers at a diner. They hadn't seen Joseph either. And then we drove into town, parked on Main Street, got out and looked around, walked toward the statue of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, since it seemed like a lucky thing to do, and then stood there in a cold wind looking around and wondering what to do next. No one else was on the street. It was that cold. The sky was spitting snow, clouds still granite. "Let's split up," I said. My father considered this. "Okay," he said, "but we're not going to stay out in this cold too long." He looked at his watch. "We have to be back by 4:30 for milking. That gives us a couple of hours." He handed me Joseph's picture. "You take that side of the street. We'll take the other." But after just a couple of blocks, I didn't. If I were Joseph, I thought, I wouldn't go into stores. I'd walk around a neighborhood, hope if someone come out, ask if they heard about a new baby around, something like that. He'd make up a story about why he wanted to know, and someone would tell him because Joseph wanted to see Juniper so badly they would be able to see he loved her, and that would be enough. I turned down a block of houses. The wind, of course, was right in my face now. Still, no one came out on the street. Clouds racking up. A few cars driving by, probably with their heaters going full blast. The smell of smoke from the wood stoves and the families in all those houses were gathered around. A church bell tolling once, the sound hard and iron in the air. So maybe I was a little bit angry at Joseph by this time. I couldn't even feel my toes, or the ends of my fingers. What chance did he have of walking around Brunswick and finding a house with a baby, and that baby would be Jupiter? I mean, what chance did he really have? What chance did I have of walking around the streets of Brunswick and suddenly running into him? Like I'd turn a corner and there he'd be, watching the house where Juniper was sleeping? What chance did either of us really have? I walked around for an hour and a half. I saw 4 other people on the sidewalks, cross-armed, shoulders to the wind. They were too huddled up for me to see their faces, but none of them was Joseph-shaped. I saw 2 kids younger than me working on a snowman, except it was so cold the snow wasn't packing, and it looked more like a snow heap, with branches sticking out for arms. An ambulance siren passed, a police car right after it. Once a car pulled into a driveway ahead of me, and parents got out and kids. The trunk popped, and they all grabbed bags of groceries. Mother looked at me and almost said something, but one of the kids called, and she was gone. By the time I saw the library, I think my face had frosted to ice. Libraries are terrific in a lot of ways. But one way is that on a frozen day in a Maine winter, you can go inside. I stood in the lobby for a long time, dripping and thawing. Then I wandered in. Everything was so warm: the shelves of books, the wooden tables, the bright carpets. Old people reading newspapers and staying warm. Fewer old people fussing at computers they didn't get and staying warm. A teen read section that didn't have enough M.T. Anderson, but it was warm. A kids section where a whole bunch of mothers with little kids were listening to One Morning in Maine on tape, and they were warm. Some of the mothers held babies. Yeah, I thought he might be here too, but he wasn't. I showed his picture to one of the librarians. She didn't recognize him. "What's his name?" she said. "Joseph," I said. She showed it to another librarian. She didn't recognize him either. "What's he doing in Brunswick?" the second librarian asked, not even looking at me. "Looking for his daughter," I said. She held the picture closer. His daughter? She said, her name is Jupiter. I said. Then she looked at me. What did you say? Her name is Jupiter? She looked down at the picture again. This is Jupiter's father, she said. Remember what I said about your heart forgetting to beat? Joseph Brooke, I whispered. He's just a baby himself, she said. He's 14. Like I said. She handed the picture back to me. You know her, I said. You know where she is. I think we'd better make a phone call, she said. All he wants to do is see her. That's all. All he wants to do is see his daughter. Who are you exactly? I have his back. Can't you let him see her? I don't even know where he is. What can I do? You don't even, sorry, she said. You don't even know where he is. When I do know where he is, can he see her? She looked at me. Listen, guy who has Jupiter's father's back? Probably not. It wouldn't be good for him, and I'm not sure it would be good for her. She's 4 months old, I said. They're not going to be together, she said. Joseph Brooke has to understand that. He's in high school. He can't give her what she needs. He's in middle school. Even worse, she said. He can love her? The librarian looked at me, and I thought she was going to cry, just like Reverend Ballou again. Maybe she thought I was going to cry. Maybe I was. Yes, he can love her, she said. He can do that, but he can't love her just for himself. He has to love her for her, too. That means he has to learn to let her live the life that can come to her with a new home. He only wants to see her, I said. I know, she said. I really do know. You're her foster mother, I said, aren't you? She waited. Tell Joseph that Jupiter is doing fine, she said. Tell him she's growing and happy and ready for a family. Tell him she needs that family. Tell him that he and his father should let her go. I stood there wondering what Joseph would do if he was standing there instead of me. That's a lot to put on you, she said, telling him that. I nodded. Actually, I knew if I told him that, he'd break my nose. Take care of it. Take care of her, I said. Nodded again and turned to go. What else was there to do? Hey, guy who has Jupiter's father's back, she said. I turned around. Tell him she's beautiful. Tell him I promise to take good care of her. And I promise she'll find a family who will love her too. And tell Jupiter about Joseph, I said. Tell him he tried to find her. I'll tell her. He tried really hard, okay? Okay. And he loves her. And he'll always love her, even if she doesn't know him. I'll tell her that too. I turned to go again. I had to, because I really was about to bawl. In the Brunswick Public Library, I was about to start crying. That's when her phone rang. I looked at her. She pulled her phone out of the bag. She listened for a minute. She was looking at me the whole time. Okay, she said. Describe him to me. She listened. Okay, I know who he is. Jupiter's father. No, really, he's Jupiter's father. You better make the call. I'll be right home. She put the phone back in the bag. This isn't some sort of plan, is it? She asked. Plan? You come to where I work and he goes to the house? Did you plan that? Joseph's at your house? My husband says he's been walking back and forth in front of the house since noontime. If this is a plan, it's just going to get both of you. It's not a plan. We better go. She looked at me. We better go? There's no we here. I'm going. You better go home or to wherever your home is. I crossed my arms. Oh, right. You're the guy who has his back, she said. Yes, I said. I'm the guy who has his back. She sighed. She sighed again. She looked at the other librarian, who shrugged, and then she sighed again. Okay, she said, I'm going to ignore my instincts here and take you with me, but only if I'll listen to the rules in the car, I said. She laughed and then nodded. You better go, she said. Do you mind if I drive? I'm 12, I said. Never would have known, she said. And I followed her out through the library offices and into the coal. She had lots of rules. I had to stay in the car. My seatbelt needed to be buckled even when we stopped. I had to not interfere. I had to not expect to see Jupiter. I really had to not interfere. I had to go find my parents immediately after we found Joseph. Did I understand that I really, really had to not interfere? We drove out of the library parking lot and down to the statue of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain again. He looked pretty cold, too. And past Bowdoin College. Then we took a right down a street of houses, and let me tell you, there were a lot of cars, and this was taking forever, and maybe I was squirming because she said, do you have to go to the bathroom or something? But I just kept looking out the window for Joseph. And then there he was, standing in front of a smallish brick house with a yard that was probably pretty nice in the summer, but was pretty bare right now. Standing with his arms crossed as if he'd wait until the end of the world, which he probably would. We pulled into the driveway. You stay here, she said. Joseph saw me, and then he saw her getting out of the car, his arms at his side, watching. She went up to Joseph and stood close to him. She reached out to touch him, but he moved back and away. She let her arm go down and she said something. He nodded. She pointed back at the car at me. He shook his head. She said something. Joseph shook his head again. And the police showed up. They got out from their car, two big guys. They walked up to the librarian and Joseph with that slow, big walk police have. They stood next to Joseph and he backed up a little so they wouldn't be standing behind him. They talked to the librarian and she talked to them, and she shook her head. She said something to Joseph again. He shook his head, and one of the big policemen put his arm on Joseph's. Joseph pulled it away, which the policeman did not like. He came closer. Joseph took a step back, and I could tell what he was going to do and where. So, I guess, could the librarian. She held her hand out. She held out her hand and said something else. They all three looked at her. She said something else, and she ran into the house. Joseph watched her. He didn't even see the other policeman come up behind him. That's how hard he watched her. He watched her. And when she came out, kind of running, in her hand was a photograph. She gave it to Joseph, and he looked at it, and I could tell that his hand was sort of trembling, but he never took his eyes off of it. Then she put her arm behind Joseph's back. He was still looking at the photograph, so he couldn't flinch. He didn't flinch, and she walked with him to her car. The big policeman watched, and she turned around and nodded to them. They let her go. She brought Joseph to the back door of the car, opened it, and said, "Get in." He looked up at her. He looked behind him at the two policemen. "Oh, Joseph, it's the best we can do for now, please." We looked at the two policemen. They were still watching. "Joseph," I said. He looked at me. "What are you doing here?" He said. "Looking for you," I said. He smiled. Really, he smiled. Number 8, and it was a definite smile, not a sort of smile. He got into the car and leaned forward. "Look at this," he said, and he showed me the picture of Jupiter. The librarian drove us back to Main Street, where my parents were standing and looking around, waiting. When we got out and my mother saw Joseph, she ran towards him. He probably wasn't sure if she was going to hug him or slaughter him. She probably wasn't sure either. She ended up hugging him. And my father did too. Even Jupiter's foster mom hugged Joseph. "You look so much alike," she said, "and determined like she is." Joseph just listened. It was like he was dragging every word about Juniper into himself so he could remember it and treasure it in his heart. "I'm taking good care of her," she said. "I'm her father," said Joseph. She looked at him. "I'll tell her all about you," she said. "I'll write to you, I promise." Joseph said, "Tell her He stopped, his mouth sort of crumpled. "I will," she said. That was pretty much all Joseph said on the way home. We stopped at a diner so he could get something to eat, since he hadn't eaten for most of the 2 days except for the Baptist potato chips and breakfast with Pastor Greenleaf. I won't even tell you how much he ate, except my father had to look twice in his wallet to make sure he had enough money. We got home in time for the milking. Rosie did her happy moo when she saw Joseph. Then at supper, he ate like he hadn't even stopped at dinner, like we hadn't even stopped at the diner. That night, Joseph stood by the window in the cold dark. He held Juniper's picture, looked at it, looked up at the sky, and looked back at the picture. I was almost asleep when he said, "So, Jackie, you still have my back?" "Yep." "And it's Jack." "Yeah," he said. He looked at Jupiter. "Thanks," he said. I don't know if he ever went to bed that night. End of chapter 7. We only have one chapter left. We're going to finish this book tomorrow. It only took us about a week to read, and then we're reading a new one. Thanks for listening.